So
Yeah, it was.
For me, like one of the number one things that really makes me pissed off about the state, and this is really where the anger or the rant comes in for me,
Yeah.
because I've had to watch this spiral, this literal death spiral happen to our state since I was born, pretty much. And that is the economic corruption
Oh,
at
I hear
every
you.
fucking level. It's so stupid. And the thing is that right now, it's all at once. Is all the economic corruption shit is coming out at once, all at the same time. So besides the ODOT thing, which is that we're suddenly in a 3 plus, I think it was like a $3.68 billion budget deficit for the next set of 4 fiscal years. We're gonna need another, like, I think it was like they wanted like $8 billion from us taxpayers to make sure they could stay afloat until the next band-aid, which would have of course been more, right? And throughout the whole history of this whole routine, it's, oh, we promise that this is actually going to cover, and we're gonna
Cover it all.
fix all the things we need to fix. We're gonna replace the things like the bridges that we need to replace. Technically, rebridge works.
The rebridges.
And like they always promise it every time, and nothing ever happens.
No.
Every fucking time people here go and give them more billions, because it's always increasing by at least an average of, say, $2.5 billion every 3 to 5 years. They suddenly have another budget deficit in the billions, need that much more.
Wow.
And so, and this is literally, you can look at the history of this. This is a very, very clear track records for longer than I've been alive, but especially the last, I'd say, 15 years. Oregon does this every 2 to 4 years, more than every 3 to 5. But like, especially the last 10 years, it's been every 2 to 4. ODOT's like, oh, we have another budget shortage of billions. It's increased this time. And also we need another like 2 to 3 billion more than we asked for last time. You're going to give it to us, And every time people had, until this last time. November 2025 was one of those big election things. And it was a huge point for the states to be like, we really do have this deficit. We can't fund ODOT. We're going to have to cut like half of its, like, I think it was literally like 50% of all of its services back. We're going to have to sell off like half of its assets, like 60% of its assets. And that means it's maintenance buildings, it's maintenance vehicles, it's crews. It's going to have to lay off like 60% of its employees. We just don't have any money to function. So here's this $8 billion, I think it was originally planned, like $8.6 billion taxpayer funded, of course, transportation levy to not just fix that, fill the stopgap, but then also have some extra left over. And people finally learned their lesson, like they did in 2017 through 2020 with TriMet, their transportation bond measures, aka new max line funding. They learned their lesson and they finally said, fine, we'll admit it. You're not getting a fucking penny from us. Fuck your stupid request. You can go into debt. We'll bankrupt ODOT if we have to. Like, this is stupid. Because literally the mass majority of voters here were livid about the original proposal. Because it's like, well, fuck you. Like, you're not going to make us pay that much more already. Especially considering we have never seen any of the fixes, any of the replacements, any of the improvements that you promised us and that we've been demanding for over a decade in some of these cases. So fuck you, because if we don't fund you, the same result's gonna be here anyway that we've already been experiencing each of the times we already handed you billions of dollars each time. And you're just gonna come back, even if we did it 3 to 4 years later, and ask us for more. With even more than you asked for this time, and billions more. Fuck you. Like, this is because it's a theme, right? It's repetition of history. So you have a track record, and we're just like, fuck you.
We need more. That they've become the gimmies, essentially.
There's no such thing as enough to them. Nothing will ever be enough to government when it comes down to taxation, obviously, or fees for that matter. Because again, they were also, if it wasn't just enough to raise taxes, they had to and add new taxes. They also had to add new fees and increase pre-existing fees for all sorts of things, especially the DMV, and it's just infuriating. And they still want to do that. They're still trying to force through the tolls on all the freeways.
In a manner of speaking, you know what they sort of remind me of? What was it called? The little orphan child Oliver saying, "Please, sir, can I have some more?"
No, that's not even really an apt description, because you have to involve a weapon of mass destruction in it, with them sticking it into your spinal column and being like, you're going to fucking give us the money. And then we're just like,
Ah.
You can take our spine. Fuck you. We don't need it anyway to stand up to you, you piece of shit. But yeah, and then of course, obviously after that was staunchly rejected, and everybody was voicing how much they were in opposition to it. The legislature rejected it because they can't get away with forcing something through that nobody wanted, right? Like they want to be able to do that, they can't because people were way too active and vocal on that one. So they're like, okay, fine, we'll reject it. And then the special, Tina Kotek's sport tampon or tampon in chief, Governor Tina Kotek, she called a special legislative session because there had to be something done for at least for a stopgap funding for ODOT, because obviously you can't technically allow, if you're in government, you can't technically allow an entire department to just shut down, especially when it's necessary and required to exist, you know. So she holds a special legislative session. Basically there was all sorts of proposals and different ideas, and there was a lot of auditing going on, especially from the Republicans on our side. And I say our side as in, Oregon. And yeah, they found out that like ODOT, there's some weird clause legally and loophole in the state that has the state preventing ODOT from accessing over $1 billion of their own funding each year. Infuriatingly and illogically, there's literally like there's a legal clause that says this is your funding, ODOT, but you can never access it. You're not allowed to touch this. And so there's $1 billion or more dollars, basically over $1 billion every fucking year that just goes into the ether because it's never used. So it just expires. That's $1 billion of taxpayer money in Oregon that just stops existing because of this weird clause that says you can't, but I'm not touching you. Like, it's fucking bullshit. Like it's there to be looked at as a symbol of what you could access, but you're not allowed to. It is yours, but you're not allowed to have it or interact with this or use it. It's always locked behind a gate. It's so fucking bullshit. And so that's one of the things the Republicans figured out, and they're like, get rid of it, so they can have access to their own $1 billion+ in funding every year that they don't currently have access to, even though it's their funding. Get rid of this fucking clause. That's one of their big solutions that they propose, and that makes perfect sense because that's $1 billion accounted for or more. Billion and a half. Okay, cool. We accounted for that. That's that much less that we have. That we have to even consider potentially challenging our citizens to pay for. From there, you have. Yeah, I think it was a week into the special legislative session, right? Tampon in chief Tina decided to propose her own, of course it's her own, right? Her own transportation funding package, which was like $4.6 billion. So it was like half the amount originally. And it only was meant as a stopgap because it was only enough supposedly to be a stopgap, basically a little plug in a leak, in a much bigger leak, right? So in other words, we're going to have to request billions more from you in about 2 years. Because it's only enough to cover 2, maybe 3 years as a stopgap. So, yeah, and then if you look at the articles and you look at everything they said, and you look at the instant visceral response, I mean, if you thought everyone was riotously, righteously, vehemently angry and livid at the state for such a proposal for the original transportation funding package, you should have fucking seen that. Instantaneous, did not matter. It was bipartisan disposition. Everybody was wanting fucking blood for that one. And I'm not kidding you. It's not an exaggeration to say that. Every person, voter or non-voter in this state, was fucking wanting basically Tina Kotek's head on a pike. They wanted blood with that proposal because it was one of the most intensely insulting, stupid proposals you could possibly imagine when it comes down to how she was going to fund that. And it just made everyone equally livid, as it should have, and I was happy to see that. And so there's that. So that doesn't pass, and then this special legislative session expires, right? And then guess what happens? A week after it expires, and they're no longer in legislative session, Tina Kotek's tampon forces her own budget, her own ODOT funding through, her own transportation funding through. She forced it through on her own outside of legislative session, outside of the emergency session for that matter. That's what emergency session is when you don't get something that has to be, decided on during the normal legislative sessions.
Wow.
And therefore they're in recess. It calls all the legislators back to the state, in this case the state capitol, to then basically compromise and come to a decision on it, and thus so they can, in this case, fund something that needs to be funded no matter what. And that's what a special legislative session is. So normally they'd be in recess, they'd be at home, they'd be on vacation, whatever. But instead they're back in the state capitol so they can decide on this. That's what that is. They also, just like the citizens, were rejecting it harshly. Tina's proposal. They didn't come to any decision. Nobody could make a compromise that anyone was accepting of. So nothing passed. There was just no funding to be had. And then she, a week after that, forces it through illegally.
Wow.
Because it has to be voted on by the legislature. She put it through on her own anyway, and then she tried through the media to make it sound like she did it. They passed it during the legislative session, the emergency session, when everyone knows they fucking didn't. And so that's why,
you gotta be kidding me.
Yeah, and so that's why, that's a whole thing. And then obviously as of recently, as of I think like 2 to 3 weeks ago, it became this huge headline that she's panicking now because she wants to repeal it, her own funding package, because
she's realizing that
she realizes how bad of a fuck up it is, and odds are is that she's gonna absolutely be eviscerated coming next election for
next election
governorship.
She's gonna be eviscerated,
and so as a result, she's like fuck. But not only is she counseling, she's trying to repeal it, begging to repeal it and counsel it, her own thing. She wants to do it with everything else that had bipartisan support for transportation related things. So like there's like in the state constitution, there's going to be new added language that's specific to the new wording and subtext for how the tolling is supposed to work before it goes in, obviously. So that way, basically it adds a lot more economic protections, especially to the citizens, and adds more rights to them to be able to reject it if they really don't want it. Or after a while, remove it or whatever, right?
Dude,
so basically, and also decide the budget, right? That had bipartisan support, not just in the voter base, but in the legislature. So that went through. And then on top of that, they were also there was trucking reform. So protect truckers more, not the trucking companies, but to give the truckers a lot more rights, better pay, and more protections on the road.
Wow.
That also have bipartisan support, both voters and legislation. That was supposed to go through because it went through in the normal session of the legislature last year. And then there's a bunch of more related things like that, right? But she said she wants to make it seem like it's only for her funding package, but everybody in the dead grandmother knows that's a fucking lie. She's trying to fucking repeal that and everything else that was actually voted on and by both the voters and the legislature to pass with bipartisan support in any relation to transportation. She wants everything repealed. So she's being even more nefarious and aggressive about it because why though? Like it doesn't even tactically doesn't make any sense in terms of PR. Like it's even worse. It's more moronic for her.